the model's lash was coming off. Not fully, not in the catastrophic, career-ending way that makes brand directors go quiet for the wrong reasons, but enough. A 2mm lift at the outer corner, and in 38 minutes, the Soleil Korea executive team was walking through that door to review final frames. 38 minutes. Zuri Ibarra had 20 seconds before leading reset. She moved before anyone else in the room had finished processing what was happening. Brush in her left hand, micro-adhesive in her right, she stepped past the head photographer, past the two junior stylists who had locked up with collective panic, and came to stand in front of the model with the focused calm of a woman who had repaired worse situations in worse conditions on worse days. "Look up," she said quietly. "Not at me, straight up, don't blink." The model obeyed immediately, because that was what happened when Zuri spoke on set. People obeyed immediately, not out of fear, out of the instinctive recognition that this was a person who knew exactly what she was doing and had no time for anything that wasn't the work. She resealed the lash in a single clean press, feathered the liner back into seamless continuity with 3 strokes, dusted the outer corner with the same burnt copper she'd built the eye from that morning, matching the depth without killing the dimension. She stepped back, looked. The model looked back at her. "Better? Perfect," Zuri said, which was the only result she worked toward. She turned away before anyone could thank her. "Reset," she told the photographer. "We have 30 minutes, let's not waste 28 of them." Her assistant Minji materialized at her elbow. "Brand director wants to know if you'd consider a third look. He says the team is very open to." "No, he thought you might say that. He's prepared to, Minji." Zuri turned just enough to look at her. "The contract says 2 looks. We are doing 2 looks. We are not doing 3 looks at 5 in the afternoon because Director Park had a new idea, somewhere between his last meeting and this one. Tell him the final frames will be extraordinary and he will understand everything when the campaign drops." Minji was already typing. "And if he pushes, he won't." Zuri looked back at the model under the reset lights. "He won't because I'm right and he knows it." She was right. The frames were extraordinary. Director Park walked in 40 minutes later, with the pressed expression of a man arriving to have opinions, and left with his arms crossed over his chest and his eyes moving across the monitor with the quiet calculation of someone counting platforms. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. The second look, quieter than the first, more deliberate, built around restraint rather than statement, was the one that stopped him completely. He stood in front of it for a long time. Zuri packed her kit and didn't wait for the compliment. She already knew. She was clasping the last case when Minji reappeared, more breathless than usual, her voice dropping slightly the way it did when she wasn't sure how to categorize something. "There's a woman in the lobby. She's been standing by the flower arrangement for a while. She keeps looking over here. She seems, I don't know how to explain it exactly. She seems important." Zuri looked at her. "Important how? Like the kind of important that doesn't announce us." Zuri picked up her bag and walked to the elevator. The lobby of the building was a high-ceilinged space in Hanam-dong that attracted a particular caliber of clientele. The kind of people who moved through the world with the specific ease of those who had never had to think too hard about where they were going. Zuri had shared elevator banks here with idols and executives, and at least 2 people she was fairly certain were prominent figures, operating in civilian disguise. She had never shared a lobby with a woman quite like this one. She was in her late 50s, perhaps 60. It was difficult to say with precision, because she wore her age the way certain women do. Not fighting it, not performing indifference to it, simply having decided that it was information she was choosing not to prioritize. Her clothing was immaculate. A pale gray wool set over a silk blouse, jewelry that was simple in the particular way that only becomes available after it has cost a significant amount of money. Her hair had gone silver white and was arranged with deliberate elegance. She had the kind of face that had clearly been striking when she was young, and had since become something more interesting. Fine lines that read as character, eyes that were sharp and warm at once, a mouth that looked like it smiled often and meant it. She was standing near the lobby's enormous celadon vase, and she was looking directly at Zuri, not rude, not invasive, the way a painter looks at something that has caught them unexpectedly, and they're deciding whether to say so. Zuri, who spent her working life reading faces, read this one in 3 seconds and found it unusual. There was assessment in it, yes, but beneath the assessment was something warmer. Recognition, almost, as if this woman had walked into the lobby expecting something ordinary and found something that exceeded it. Their eyes met. The woman smiled first. It was such an open smile, so unexpectedly warm. that Zuri found herself returning it before she'd decided to. The woman walked over. Her heels were quiet on the marble floor. She moved the way someone moves, when they are accustomed to rooms making space for them without being asked. "Your makeup," she said in Korean, gesturing toward her own face to indicate she meant Zuri's. "It's extraordinary. Did you do it yourself?" Zuri answered in Korean, which produced the small, familiar widening of eyes. The pleased surprise she had long since catalogued, and occasionally still enjoyed. "I did. The liner especially. That precision, I've never seen it outside of a professional setting." "That's because I am a professional." Zuri offered her hand. Zuri Abara, makeup artist. The woman's eyes did something subtle, a slight brightening that went just past polite. Interest. Like a person who has been searching for something and has just recognized it without having expected to find it here. She took Zuri's hand with both of hers, which in Korean culture was warmth offered with intention. Bae Hai-jin, director of the Bae Legacy Foundation. A small pause, and then with the easy certainty of a woman who believed in the efficiency of the universe. "I think this is fate making itself useful." Zuri blinked. "I'm sorry? I've been looking for someone for a project, but we can discuss that properly." Madame Hai-jin's expression shifted into something pleasant and unhurried and slightly too knowing. "First, are you married?" Zuri laughed before she could stop it. A real laugh, surprised out of her. "That's quite a pivot. I find the important questions are better established early. It saves everyone a great deal of time." "No," Zuri said, because deflection felt both futile and mildly rude in the face of that much direct warmth. "I'm not married." Madame Hai-jin nodded with the quiet satisfaction of a hypothesis confirmed. She reached into her bag, small, structured, almost certainly made specifically for her, and produced a card that she pressed into Zuri's hand with the calm assurance of someone accustomed to people accepting things from her without question. "For the project," she said. Then, with a smile that was warm and precise and carried the faintest suggestion of something being set in motion, "You have extraordinary presence, Zuri C. The kind that photographs beautifully, I imagine." She walked away before Zuri could respond. Heels still quiet, posture still perfect. Zuri looked down at the card. Bae Hai-jin, director, Bae Legacy Foundation, Bae Holdings. She knew that name. Everyone in Seoul who understood where real power actually lived knew that name. Bae Holdings was not a company. It was a lineage. Real estate, private equity, hospitality, and other interests that came up in quiet conversations at industry events and never appeared in any official documentation. Old money, long reach, and a family whose name surfaced in newspapers only when they personally decided it should. She turned the card over. On the back, in careful, elegant handwriting, "You remind me of someone my son needs to meet." Zuri stared at it for a long moment. Then she laughed, genuinely, from the chest, and dropped it into her bag next to her favorite setting spray. She called Deal from the car on the way home, because Deals was the only person she trusted to receive a story like this at the exact frequency it deserved. Dealey received it at the exact frequency it deserved. She wrote it on the back, by hand. His voice had reached a register that suggested he was either standing up or about to. "Zuri, do you understand what has happened to you today? You have walked directly into a drama." "I haven't walked into anything. I accepted a business card." "You accepted a business card that said you remind me of someone my son needs to meet on the back of it in handwriting." "Zuri, who does that?" "The mother of the man you end up with. That is who does that." Del. She was home now, keys on the counter, heels off. The card sitting on her kitchen island where she'd placed it without thinking when she walked in. "I am 32 years old. I built my career from nothing in a city that doesn't give those away. I am not going to be romantically managed by a stranger." "She's not a stranger. She's Bae Hai-jin. Her son is Bae Shin-woo, Bae Holdings." A brief pause for effect. "Zuri, have you ever actually looked at a photo of that man?" "Because I have seen a photo of that man, and I want you to know I say this as someone who is extremely secure in himself. Whoever designed that face was showing off." Zuri looked at the card on her kitchen island. "I'm not calling her," she said. She moved the card to the interior pocket of her work bag before she went to bed. She did not call. On the 7th day, at 8:51 in the morning, while she was in the back of a car watching Gangnam slide past the windows, on the way to a brand consultation, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She answered it anyway, because unknown numbers in Seoul at that hour were usually work. The voice on the other end was warm, accented, and immediately identifiable. "Zuri C, it's Hai-jin. I hope I haven't caught you at a terrible moment." Zuri looked at her phone. Then she put it back to her ear. "How did you get this number?" "I know people who know things," Madame Hai-jin said pleasantly. "This is Seoul, darling. Information moves between the right people as a courtesy. Now, the project. The Bay Legacy Foundation is mounting a multimedia arts exhibition in the spring, and we need a makeup artist who understands both beauty and visual storytelling at the same time. Your name came up from 3 separate sources. A brief pause. None of them prompted. The brief arrived in Zuri's inbox 11 minutes later. She read it once, quickly, then a second time, slowly. Then she opened the foundation's website and went through their past exhibitions with the careful, unhurried attention she gave to anything that claimed to be serious work. The project was called Roots and Resonance, a multimedia exploration of beauty, memory, and identity as expressed across African and Korean artistic traditions. Film sculpture, live performance, a photography series. The visual language across all live components needed to achieve cohesion without uniformity. Cultural depth without costume. Contemporary without abandoning the emotional weight of the historical references threading through it. It was, Zuri thought, sitting back in her chair with her tea going cold beside her, a genuinely beautiful project. The kind of work that asks something real of the person doing it. Not just skill, judgment, sensibility. The ability to hold 2 traditions in both hands at once without flattening either of them. She sent back 3 questions. The kind of questions designed to reveal quickly whether a creative team actually understood the work they were commissioning or were simply collecting a prestigious name to attach to it. Madam Hyjin answered all 3 personally within 20 minutes. With precision, with real comprehension of the methodology involved. Not the answers of a socialite with a foundation. The answers of someone who understood what they were building. Zuri read them twice, set her phone down, picked it up again. "I'll come to the meeting," she said when the call connected. Wonderful. A warm pause, and then with the casual, unhurried timing of someone dropping something into a conversation that had been waiting to be dropped. "My son will be there as well. He co-developed the exhibition concept. His input on the creative direction will be essential." Hyjin C, yes? "I'm coming for the project." "Of course, not for any other reason. Of course. Only the project, a small, serene beat. He has exceptional taste in art, by the way. Studied it informally for years, very serious about it. He also speaks 4 languages. I mention that only because it's professionally relevant for an international exhibition. Oh, and he cooks, from actual ingredients. Real ones, not from packets. Not that that has any bearing on anything." Zuri closed her eyes briefly. "Goodbye, Hyjinsi. Thursday, 1 o'clock, Sin Sadong." The smile was audible. "You'll love it." The restaurant was the kind of place that spent a great deal of money, specifically in order to appear as though it hadn't. Small tables with real space between them. Staff who had perfected the art of appearing at precisely the right moment and vanishing at all others. Flowers at the entrance that were fresh and enormous and entirely unpretentious about it. Zuri arrived 4 minutes early, as she always did, and found Madam Hyjin already at the table, rising as she entered with the warm, deliberate grace of a woman who stood for people she was genuinely glad to see. Hyjin looked at Zuri's entrance. Deep burgundy silk open at the collar, wide cream trousers, her locks loose past her collarbone, threaded with 2 thin gold rings, minimal gold at her ears, with the expression of a person whose plan was proceeding exactly as scheduled. "You're early," she said, taking both of Zuri's hands in greeting. "Always," Zuri said. "My son is also early. 3 minutes as a rule." A brief, almost imperceptible glance toward the entrance. "So he should be arriving just about." The door opened. Zuri was lowering herself into her chair when she looked up. Bei Shinwoo was tall in the way that registered across a room. Not imposing, simply present. The kind of height that came paired with proportion, and therefore read as attractive rather than startling. He wore dark charcoal, a suit that had clearly been constructed for his specific measurements. Collar open, no tie, and he moved through the restaurant with the unhurried ease of someone who had never in his life needed to signal that he belonged somewhere. He simply belonged and moved accordingly. Zuri looked at faces for a living. She read bone structure the way other people read text. She registered, with the clean objectivity of professional habit, that his face was extraordinary was the word. Strong jaw, clean line of a nose, and eyes that, as they swept the room and found their table, were both direct and warm in a way she had not expected from the reputation that preceded him. He saw his mother first, and something in his expression changed, softened visibly. The private way faces only move for people you actually love and have stopped performing around. Then he saw Zuri. He stopped. Half a step, half a second. The pause of someone whose brain has received something it needs a moment to properly process. His expression didn't perform anything. It simply focused. Zuri, who had spent a decade developing precise fluency in the language of how people looked at her, recognized what this look was. She decided immediately to be completely unbothered by it. Madame Haijin gestured with the quiet, satisfied pride of a woman unveiling something she had worked very carefully to arrange. Shinwoo-ya, this is Zuri Abara, the makeup artist I told you about. He crossed to the table. Up close, his eyes were a steady, deep brown. He offered a slight bow, then his hand, and his handshake was firm and brief and respectful. Zuri, see, I've followed your work. The Aura Beauty campaign, the second look specifically. She had not been prepared for that. Most people who knew her work cited the first look. The first look was the visible one. The one that ran across every outdoor placement from Gangnam to Mapo. The one the brand had built its entire outdoor campaign around. The second look was quieter, more considered. It required you to actually look at it, to sit with it, before you understood what it was doing and why it worked. Zuri tilted her head, just slightly. Most people mention the first look. The first look tells you what it is, Shinwoo said, settling into his seat with the easy directness of someone who was simply saying what he thought. The second look makes you figure it out yourself. The restraint is what gives it weight. He picked up his menu. That's the difference between something good and something that stays with you. Zuri looked at Madame Haijin. Madame Haijin was studying her water glass with an expression of absolute serene innocence. She coached him, Zuri thought. That woman absolutely coached him. Except the thing was, it hadn't felt coached. It had felt like someone who had actually looked, who had actually thought about what they saw, who was now saying what they'd concluded, with no performance attached to it. Zuri picked up her menu. This, she thought, is going to be a very long lunch. It was 3 hours. She didn't register the time passing until the light, through the restaurant windows, had shifted from afternoon white to early evening gold, and she looked up from what had become a real conversation, not a pitch, not a professional exchange designed to produce an outcome, but an actual conversation about visual language and cultural weight, and what it means to make something that honors its sources without being diminished by them. And realized the restaurant had quietly transformed around them while she wasn't paying attention. The other tables had turned over twice. Outside on the Sinsadong street, they said goodbye. Shinwoo offered his card. For exhibition correspondence, he said, without quite meeting her eyes, which told her he was aware of how it sounded. Madame Haijin embraced her with both hands, and the warm, composed satisfaction of a woman who had gotten precisely what she came for and was too elegant to say so directly. Zuri stood alone on the pavement, took out her phone, opened a browser, typed his name. The results loaded. She read them. Playboy, cold, calculated, too smooth. She scrolled, read more, closed the tabs. Then she called Deal. He's not a playboy, she said. Before he could speak. A pause. Then you met him. His mother set up a lunch, as mothers of destiny do. And Zuri looked out at the street. At Seoul going golden around her, at the city she had chosen a decade ago, and that had, in its own relentless way, chosen her back. He knew the second look, she said. Deal made a sound on the other end of the phone. He knew the second look, he said slowly. I'm working on the exhibition. That's all. It's a good project. Sure it is. That is the entire reason. Completely. Del. Say something useful, or I'm ending this call. Zuri. His voice shifted into the register he used when he was being serious underneath the noise. That man looked at your work, went past the obvious thing, and found the part that required real attention. And now you're standing on a street telling me about it at a pause. 7:58 at night. Zuri said nothing. You still have the mother's card, Deal said. And I'd bet anything you've already moved it to a different bag. She had not told Deal about the bag. I hate you, she said. You love me, he said. Go home, be normal about it. She went home. She was normal about it for exactly 4 hours. At 9:17, her phone lit up with a message from an unsaved number. A reference document for the exhibition. Detailed, thorough, genuinely useful. She read it twice, then a third time. Then she set the phone face down on her coffee table and said, very quietly to no one, absolutely not. She picked it up and typed back 2 questions about the source methodology. He responded in 5 minutes, with real answers. She did not sleep until well past midnight, which was not unusual for her. But the reason was, the reference document exchange lasted until 11:51 at night. She had sent 2 questions about source methodology. He had answered, both within 5 minutes, with the kind of precision that suggested he had not been doing anything else. She had followed up with a third, more specific, the kind she only asked when she genuinely wanted to know. And he had answered that 1 in 4 minutes. By the time she finally set her phone face down on her coffee table, her tea was completely cold, and Seoul outside her window had gone quiet in the particular way it only did past midnight, as if the city had briefly agreed to exhale. She lay on her sofa for a long time staring at the ceiling. Absolutely not, she said again to no one. She was at the foundation offices by 9 the following morning with a full presentation outline and a very deliberate expression of professional focus. She saw him 8 more times over the following 3 weeks. Every single meeting was entirely legitimate. Every single meeting was completely professional. And every single one produced exactly one moment that she found herself replaying in the quiet of her studio, in the back of a car, in the particular stillness of 2 in the morning, when she should have been sleeping and wasn't, turning it over the way you turn something smooth and unexpected over in your hand, not quite able to put it down. The first meeting was at the foundation's offices in Jongno. A beautiful space, clean lines, natural light, the kind of room designed to make ideas feel possible and serious at the same time. Zuri presented her initial vision for the live performance components. She had spent 4 days on it, not to impress anyone. She didn't work that way. But because the project deserved her full consideration, and she didn't know how to give something less than it deserved. Shinwoo listened the way rare people listen, not waiting for his turn, not assembling his response while she was still speaking. Actually listening, the kind that pulls the words out of you, because you can feel them landing somewhere real, in a person who is actually following the logic of what you're building. When she finished, there was a brief silence, not uncomfortable, the thinking kind, and then he said, "The part about layering texture against cultural reference without letting one flatten the other. Can you say more about that?" It was exactly the right question, not a polite question, not a performance of engagement. A question from someone who had followed the thread of her thinking all the way to its edge and wanted to see what lived on the other side of it. She spoke for another 14 minutes without planning to. Afterward, gathering her materials, she was aware of Madame Hai-jin watching from across the room with the quiet, composed expression of a woman keeping very careful score. The second meeting, he brought coffee. Her specific order, the complicated one, the one with 3 modifiers, and a particular temperature specification that even Minji sometimes got wrong on rushed mornings. Zuri looked at the cup, then at him. "Minji told me," he said before she could ask. "I asked her," he said it simply, without making it into anything larger than what it was. "Just, I wanted to know, so I found out." She looked at the coffee for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, then picked it up and said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't give him more than she was ready to give. Not yet. The third meeting, she arrived to find the gallery workspace rearranged. Not dramatically, not a full transformation, but the materials had been shifted, the lighting adjusted, and the entire configuration had been reorganized into exactly, precisely, specifically the layout she had mentioned in passing 2 meetings ago. Offhandedly, mid-sentence, while her attention was on something else entirely. A fleeting thought about what might improve the visual flow said once, without emphasis, that she had not expected anyone to register, let alone act on. He had done it himself, apparently, before she arrived, without saying a word about it to anyone. Zuri stood in the rearranged space and looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at him. "Did you? It's better this way," he said. In the even tone she was beginning to understand was simply how he talked, without performance, without waiting for acknowledgement. "You were right about the sightlines." She turned back to the space so he couldn't see her face do something she hadn't given it permission to do. He was right. It was better. That was somehow the most disorienting part of all of it. Madame Hai-jin, naturally, was managing the entire situation with the refined, relentless subtlety of a weather system, omnipresent, technically inevitable, and impossible to object to, because nothing she did was technically objectionable. She appeared at meetings in her legitimate capacity as foundation director, and spent approximately half of each visit finding organic, conversational, entirely unprepared reasons to mention Shinwoo's qualities and passings. Shinwoo designed the layout of this floor himself. She mentioned during a site visit, gesturing at the space around them with the mild tone of someone whose thoughts had simply wandered there. "He has a very precise spatial instinct, rare quality. He speaks 4 languages," she said at a separate meeting, to no one in particular, as if reading from an invisible list. 5 if you include the classical Chinese. Not that 2 isn't perfectly respectable, of course. "He made dinner for the whole family last Sunday," she offered on yet another occasion, with the reflective warmth of someone sharing a pleasant memory that had nothing to do with anything. "Braised short rib, from scratch. 6 hours. Real ingredients. I only mention it because it's interesting to know these things about a person." Shinwoo, during each of these performances, developed an intense and immediate interest in whatever object was nearest to him. At a desk, the papers. At a standing session, his phone. Once, caught entirely in the open with nothing conveniently available, he had looked up and found Zuri already looking at him, and the expression on his face was so exactly the expression of a man who is mortified and resigned in equal measure, and who knows that both things are completely visible, that she'd had to look away immediately. She had come within 2 seconds of laughing. Not at him, with him, except that he hadn't laughed yet and she refused to be first. She came close 3 separate times. One afternoon, when Shinwoo stepped out to take a call, Madame Haijin moved into the chair across from Zuri with the decisive, unhurried grace of a woman who had been waiting for precisely this window and intended to use every second of it. "You like him," she said. Not a question. Zuri looked up from her reference sheets. "I think the exhibition brief is very strong. I didn't ask about the brief, I know." Zuri set down her pen. She looked at Madame Haijin directly, because the woman deserved directness, and Zuri had never been able to sustain anything else for long with someone who was genuinely paying attention. "Haijin, see, I understand what you're doing. And I think he is, from everything I can see, he is a genuinely good person. You love him and he clearly loves you, and that tells me something real." She paused, choosing the next words carefully. "But I have learned not to assume. I have learned not to let what looks like interest convince me it is interest. I've been wrong before, and it cost me something I didn't get back easily." She looked down at her notes. "I wait for certainty now, before I let myself believe something." Madame Haijin was quiet for a moment. Her eyes, sharp and warm in equal measure, stayed steady on Zuri's face. "Do you know," she said finally carefully, "that he told me after that first lunch that he hadn't tasted any of the food?" Zuri looked up. "What?" He was sitting at the table. The food was in front of him. He was eating it. A small, soft pause. And he was so completely absorbed in the conversation that he finished an entire meal and could not tell me afterward what a single thing had tasted like. A quiet smile that came from somewhere real. "My son, who has had strong opinions about food since he was 7 years old. He ate an entire lunch and forgot it was happening because he was listening to you." She folded her hands on the table. "He is not performing. Zuri's. That is not who he is, and it has never been who he is. I know my son. I know what it looks like when he is going through the motions, and I know what it looks like when he is not." Her voice softened, not less certain, just more honest beneath the composure. "He has simply been waiting for someone who would let him be fully seen. He stopped expecting that a long time ago." Zuri opened her mouth, found nothing ready to come out of it, closed it. The door opened. Shinwoo came back in, phone put away, attention moving immediately to the table and settling, as it reliably did, as she had stopped pretending she didn't notice, on Zuri. "Sorry," he said, "logistics." He glanced between them with the precise, calm expression of a man who knows exactly what he has walked in on and is making the strategic decision not to press it. "What did I miss?" "Nothing," they said, simultaneously. He looked between them, said nothing, sat down, picked up his pen. The moment she had replayed most often came on a Thursday evening, late, when the rest of the foundation staff had packed up and gone home, and Zuri had to stay behind to finalize a color palette presentation she wasn't satisfied with yet. She hadn't expected anyone else to be in the building. The workspace was quiet in the way rooms go quiet after hours, a denser, more honest silence than daytime, like the room had stopped performing and settled into itself. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. She had, without meaning to, learned the specific rhythm of how he moved. Unhurried even. The sound of someone who was never late and therefore never rushed. She looked up from her spread of swatches as he appeared in the doorway. His jacket was gone, sleeves rolled to the elbow. He looked less assembled than usual, not undone, just real. The version of himself that existed when there was no room left for composure to be performed. "You're still here," he said. "So are you." He came in. Looked at the table, the swatches arranged by temperature and weight, the small reference photographs pinned up, her handwritten notes crowding the margins of her palette sheets, and was quiet for a moment, just looking at it. "This is beautiful," he said quietly. "It's not finished." "I know." He looked at her. "Still beautiful." He glanced at the chair across from her, a question in the look. She gestured at it. He sat. For a while, they simply existed in the same space. She organized. He reviewed something on his phone, occasionally making a note on a pad beside him. And it settled into one of those silences that becomes, without announcement, its own kind of honesty. The kind you can only reach with someone when pretending has become more effort than either of you has left. It was Zuri who broke it. She hadn't planned to. She was placing a deep terracotta swatch beside a warm gold, deciding whether they worked together, and the question came out before she'd finished deciding to ask it. The Playboy thing, she said, not looking up. Where does it actually come from? A beat. She heard him shift slightly. His voice was even. Careful in a way that was different from his usual calm. The careful of someone, navigating territory that had cost them something before. You searched me. I did. Most people do. A pause. Does it bother you? I'm genuinely asking. She looked up then. He was watching her with that directness she had stopped being surprised by and had not stopped noticing. Steady, patient, waiting for whatever was actually true. I'm asking where it comes from, she said, not whether I believe it. He considered this with real thought. Not the performance of consideration, the actual thing. I don't explain myself to people who have already made up their minds, he said finally. Which means I never explain myself. Which means I never push back against the narrative, which, apparently, confirms it. A brief pause. It is a very closed system. Zuri looked at him for a moment. That sounds lonely, she said. Something small and real moved in his face. A loosening of something that had been held in place for a long time. It is, he said, simply, without dressing it up or reaching back to qualify it. It is. She looked back down at her swatches, moved the terracotta, placed it beside the gold again, and decided they were right together after all. For what it's worth, she said, not looking up. I don't form conclusions from what other people say. I form them from what I see myself. The silence after that was different from the one before it. Warmer, wider. The way a room feels after someone opens a window neither of you realized had been closed. Zuri, see, he said. Just Zuri. She didn't look up. You don't need the formality anymore. She could hear without seeing that he was smiling. Zuri, he said, and the way he said it, careful and deliberate, like a word he had been waiting to say that way for a while, did something to the quality of the air between them that she was not going to examine too closely tonight. She kept her eyes on the swatches. She was smiling too. She let him take her to dinner on a Sunday. Not a meeting. Not a working lunch that could be filed under professional correspondence. A dinner asked for plainly, through his personal number, with none of his mother's fingerprints anywhere on it. Can I take you to dinner? Not for the exhibition. Just dinner. She had held her phone for 45 seconds. She was aware of holding it. She was aware of the 45 seconds passing. Then, yes, but I'm choosing the restaurant, he replied immediately. Of course. She chose a place she had loved for 2 years. A small Korean-Japanese spot tucked into a quiet street in Mapo. Not impressive by any measurable standard. Not the kind of address that appeared on any of Seoul's obsessive lists of places worth being seen at. It had no particular reputation to trade on. The food was honest, the lighting was warm, and she felt like herself there in a way she valued more than she could easily explain to anyone who hadn't spent years building a life in a city that wasn't born theirs. She wore a strapless dress in deep plum, clean and fitted, with a caramel drape coat thrown over her shoulders. Her locks pinned at the crown with gold pins, small gold drops at her ears. She looked like exactly what she was. A woman who knew her own taste and lived inside it without apology. He was waiting outside when she arrived. Exactly on time. She had established by now that this was simply who he was. Bei Shin-woo treated other people's time as something that mattered because he believed it did. And that belief showed up quietly and consistently in everything he did without him ever mentioning it. He looked at her when she came around the corner, and the expression on his face was so direct in its appreciation, so entirely free of strategy, that it landed differently than she had been braced for. You look incredible, he said. Just that. A true sentence offered plainly. Thank you, she said. And they went in. Over 3 hours, she learned things about him that his reputation had not suggested and the internet had not bothered to find. She learned that he had a deeply serious, privately held passion for tteokbokki that his family found mildly undignified given the family's position, and that he had very specific, very carefully developed opinions about which establishments in Seoul were actually doing it correctly. Opinions he delivered with the same quiet authority he brought to everything else, which she found completely charming and was not going to say out loud. She learned that he had been accepted to study architecture at university and had done business instead because the family had needed him to, and that he said this without bitterness, with the clean, settled honesty of someone who had made peace with a real compromise, without pretending the compromise hadn't required something of him. She learned that he had read all 3 of her published trade interviews and retained specific things she'd said in each of them, not in the way of someone who had done research in preparation, but in the way of someone who had genuinely found them interesting and had kept them the way you keep things that matter. She learned that when he laughed fully, really laughed, his head tilting back slightly, the composure coming apart in the best possible way. His whole face became something that was nearly impossible not to watch. She learned that he had noticed her watching when he laughed. She learned that he was watching her in exactly the same way. Neither of them said anything about it. Walking back through Mapo afterward, the city doing its Sunday night thing around them. Warm lights, the low, easy hum of Seoul between the end of the day and the beginning of the night. They were walking closer than they had been at the start of the evening. The space between them had quietly, without announcement, become smaller. She had her coat back on. The street was unhurried around them. He reached over and took her hand, not as a declaration, not as a move calculated to produce a specific response. Quietly, naturally, with the easy assurance of someone who had finished deliberating and was simply acting on what he'd decided. Zuri looked down at their hands, then up at him. He was already looking at her, steady, patient, waiting without pressure for whatever she was going to do. "I'm not easy," she said. "I know. I don't move fast. I don't trust quickly. I have a long history of knowing exactly what I am worth and making sure other people understand it before I let them anywhere near the parts of me that matter." Zuri, his voice was quiet, completely unhurried. "I know. I'm not asking you to be anything other than exactly what you are." A pause. The city moved around them, indifferent and glittering and alive. "I'm just holding your hand." She looked at him for a long moment, this man who listened without waiting for his turn, who rearranged rooms because she'd been right and made nothing of it afterward, who got quietly mortified when his mother catalogued his qualities like features on a brochure, who had said it is lonely without flinching and without taking it back. "Okay," she said, and kept walking, hand in his. Soul glittering around them, indifferent and warm and entirely unhelpful about any of it. His mother found out within 24 hours, through methods Zuri chose not to investigate, and called on Monday morning while Zuri was in her studio taking inventory of her kit. "I heard you had dinner," Madame Hyjin said. "We did. And?" Zuri looked at her shelves. She had been smiling at them. She realized, had been smiling at a row of setting sprays for approximately 30 seconds before she noticed. "It was dinner. Good dinner." The sound from the other end of the line could only be described as triumphant, not loud, not dramatic. The deep, private, precisely calibrated satisfaction of a woman whose plan had arrived exactly where she had always known it would, and who had the grace not to make too much noise about it. "I'm not saying anything," Madame Hyjin said. "I am simply very content," as his mother, with absolutely no agenda, a small pause. "He is very good at loving people, you know, when someone gives him the space for it." Her voice dropped into something quieter and more real. "He has just been waiting for someone who would." Zuri set down the brush she had been holding. Outside her studio window, Seoul moved through its Monday with its usual relentless, beautiful forward momentum. She thought about a hand taken quietly on a Mapo street, about a room rearranged because she had been right, about a man who forgot to taste his food because he was too busy listening. "I know," she said softly. She didn't say it again. She didn't need to. The 2 days after that Monday call were the quietest, most ordinary days Zuri had experienced in weeks. She worked. She slept properly for the first time in longer than she wanted to admit. She replied to Shin Woo's Tuesday morning message, a link to a reference article about a Korean textile artist whose work was feeding into the roots and resonance visual language, with 3 thoughts about how the patterns connected to the palette directions she was building, and he had replied with 2 questions that kept her thinking on the walk to her next appointment. It felt, for the first time since a lobby in Hanamdong had rearranged her autumn, like something was simply good. Uncomplicated. Real in a way that didn't require her to manage it or brace against it. She had even told Deal it was good, which was the clearest possible signal, because Zuri Abara did not tell Dile things were good until she was certain. She was in the middle of a brand consultation in Gangnam on Wednesday morning when Minji appeared in the doorway of the meeting room. The expression on her assistant's face stopped her mid-sentence. Minji had worked with her for 3 years. In 3 years, Zuri had seen her flustered, overworked, occasionally overwhelmed, and once genuinely panicked when a courier lost an entire kit the night before a major campaign shoot. She had never seen this expression, a specific, careful blankness, the face of someone who has received information and is trying to decide how to deliver it in a room full of people without detonating anything. Zuri excused herself, stepped into the hallway, took the phone Minji held out without a word. The headline was in Korean. She read it once, quickly. Then, because her brain refused to fully receive it the first time, she read it again slowly, every word. Bay Holdings Hairs, spotted with foreign woman. Sources claim relationship staged to rehabilitate family image amid ongoing financial investigations. Below the headline, a photograph. Taken on Amapo Street on Sunday night. The angle was distant, a long lens, someone who had been positioned and waiting. She was recognizable, so was he. Their hands were visible in the frame. The caption named her with the particular, researched precision of someone who had done this deliberately. Her full name, her professional title, her nationality, her client history, not a passing mention. A profile assembled with intent. She stood in the hallway and counted to 11. Then she handed the phone back to Minji, returned to the meeting room, apologized to the client, with a composure she was building in real time from whatever materials were available, rescheduled everything remaining on the agenda, and left the building. In the car, she opened her own inbox. It had already begun to fill. Industry contacts. A journalist she had never spoken to personally. 2 messages from numbers she didn't recognize. And one she did, a PR firm she had been in early conversations with about a potential partnership. A single clean line. Given recent developments, we think it best to pause our discussions for now. She read that one twice. Then she opened her conversation with Shin Woo, looked at the last exchange between them. His Tuesday message, her reply, his 2 questions, her answers. A conversation about textile patterns and palette direction, and the weight of historical reference in contemporary visual work. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she typed, "Did you know about this?" She put the phone face down on the seat beside her and looked out the window at Seoul moving past and kept her face completely still. She was not hurt. She told herself this and believed approximately half of it. What she actually, precisely was, the word she landed on after turning it over in the back of that car, was cold. The specific coldness that comes not from anger, but from the careful, practiced shutdown of something you had been, in the process of allowing yourself to believe. The closing of a door you had only recently, tentatively, with great deliberate effort, begun to open. She had done it before. She was very good at it. She did not enjoy being very good at it. Deal called before she reached her studio. She answered because not answering Dell when something had happened was its own kind of announcement, and she didn't have the energy for the conversation that would follow. "I saw it," he said without preamble. "I know. Zuri, I'm fine. You're using the fine voice. Deal. The fine voice is the voice you use when you are the furthest possible distance from fine, and you need me to not push on it yet." A brief pause. "I won't push yet. Are you going to your studio?" "Nearly there. Good. Go, make tea. Don't make any permanent decisions for at least 2 hours. A beat. And Zuri, don't decide anything about him from a tabloid headline. You, of all people, know exactly what it looks like when a narrative gets built around someone from the outside." She was quiet. The car moved through the city. "Ha hasn't called," she said. "It has been 20 minutes. He replied to a source document text in 4 minutes at 11 at night. Silence on Deal's end, a long one. Then quietly, "Okay, fair." She hung up and let herself into her studio and stood in the middle of it without touching anything. The space was exactly as she'd left it that morning. Kit organized, reference boards up, her palette work for the Roots and Resonance exhibition spread across the back table where she'd been refining it all week. Color swatches, notes in her own handwriting. The deep terracotta beside the warm gold that she had decided, on a Thursday night in a quiet room with a man who had nowhere else to be, were right together. She looked at it for a long time. Her phone lit up on the table. Not a text, a call, his name on the screen. She looked at it through 2 full rings, picked it up. "I saw your message." No greeting. His voice was different, still even, but underneath the evenness something tightly controlled that she hadn't heard from him before, the sound of a person holding something in place by effort rather than habit. "I'm already in the car. I'm coming to you." "You don't need to. Please don't make any decisions before I get there." She said nothing. He read the silence correctly and hung up. He arrived in 19 minutes. She had not been watching the time and therefore knew exactly how much of it had passed. When the knock came, she opened the door and stepped back without a word, and he came in and looked at her. The way he always looked at her, like he was actually trying to understand what he was seeing, rather than manage what he was facing. And he didn't touch her, and he didn't open with anything designed to immediately improve his position. He said, "I didn't know." She looked at him. "I did not know it was going to happen," he said. "I want to be clear about that before anything else. There is a board member, a man who has been opposed to several of my decisions over the past 18 months and who has been building towards something. I did not anticipate that he would use you to get there." He held her gaze without flinching from it. "I knew the family name carried risk. I knew that being associated with me publicly could draw a kind of attention you didn't ask for and hadn't agreed to. I should have told you that before it became relevant. I chose not to because I didn't want it to become a reason for you to step back, and that was a selfish calculation, and it was wrong. Zuri said nothing. She was watching him with the careful, precise attention she gave to anything she needed to fully understand before she responded to it. I'm not asking you to make this easier for me, he said. You can be angry. You have every right to be angry. I just needed you to know that you were never, he paused. And something moved briefly across his face, there and gone, the kind of thing you only caught if you were already watching closely. You were never a calculation, not once. Nothing between us has been anything other than exactly what it was. The studio was quiet around them. Outside, Seoul moved through its Wednesday afternoon, entirely indifferent to the specific gravity of the silence in this particular room. The partnership conversation, Zuri said. Her voice was level, precise. The one that went quiet this morning. That is my work, Shinwoo, my name. I have spent 10 years building something in this city, and my name is the only currency the whole thing runs on. I know. You understand what that means. It's not abstract. My name is not attached to my career. It is my career. It is the entire structure. I know, he said, and I am going to fix it. You can't simply, I'm going to issue a statement, he said, under my own name, not a family statement, not a company statement, mine. Naming the source of the leak directly, correcting the framing, and making explicit that your involvement with the Bay A Legacy Foundation is professional, legitimate, and entered into entirely on your terms. He said it without drama, without the energy of someone making a gesture designed to be witnessed. The way he said everything, like a conclusion he had already arrived at and was simply reporting. I'm also going to address the board member in a session this week. That conversation will be uncomfortable for him. Zuri studied him. That exposes you internally. That kind of session gets out. Yes, it will raise questions about Bay Holdings' stability. Investors will react. Yes, you're willing to take all of that. I already decided, he said, on the way here. She looked at him for a long, steady moment. She had been prepared, in the car, for a different version of this conversation. She had been building her responses to the version where he arrived with careful explanations and managed framing, where the through line of everything he said was the protection of the name above the person. She knew that version. She had encountered it before in different forms and it had taught her things about the world that had taken years to stop flinching from. This was not that version. I need some time, she said. Okay, I'm not saying I'm done. I'm saying I need to sit with this without anyone in the room. Something shifted in him. Not relief, not quite, but the particular loosening of a person who has been holding something very heavy and has just been told they are allowed to set it down temporarily. Okay, he said again. Take whatever you need. He moved toward the door, stopped, didn't turn all the way around, just enough. For what it's worth, he said quietly, before any of this happened this morning, I was going to ask you to come with me to an architecture exhibition this weekend. There's a retrospective in Itaewon. I thought you'd find it interesting. A pause so brief it was almost not a pause at all. I still think you'd find it interesting. He let himself out. Zuri stood in the middle of her studio and listened to his footsteps move for a long time after. The sound of them was gone. She drafted the withdrawal message to Madame Hai-jin that evening. She sat at her kitchen counter with her laptop open, and a glass of wine she kept forgetting to drink, and she wrote it with the precision she brought to everything. Clear, professional, saying exactly what needed to be said without a single excess word. She was withdrawing from the Roots and Resonance exhibition due to unforeseen professional conflicts. She was grateful for the opportunity. She wished the project every success and was confident the team would find a creative consultant whose involvement would be less complicated for all parties involved. She read it back. It was a good letter, airtight, exactly right. She did not send it. She closed the laptop and sat in the quiet of her kitchen and looked at the middle distance and tried to locate, honestly, the version of herself who would send that letter without hesitation. The version who had learned, in a different city, with a different situation, at a cost she had never fully quantified, exactly what happened when you let something in that turned out to cost more than you had prepared for. That version of herself was practiced, efficient. She had kept Zuri safe and functional and forward-moving for years. She had also kept her, for a very long time, quietly and completely alone. Deal called at 9:43. She let it ring twice. You drafted something, he said when she answered. A withdrawal letters. Did you say no? A long exhale on his end. Good. I don't know that it's good, Deal. I don't know what it is. I know my name was in a tabloid today, attached to a story I didn't write and didn't consent to, and I know that is because of him, and I know. She stopped, looked out the window at Seoul going dark and bright simultaneously the way it did at this hour, lights rising as the sky fell. "What do you know?" Deal said quietly. Just her friend asking. She thought about it honestly. Not the managed version, the actual thing. "I know he came," she said, not called. Came. 19 minutes. And I know he didn't arrive with a version of events designed to make himself look better inside the story. He came with the truth, and he stood in it without asking me to make it more comfortable for him." She paused. "And I know he was going to ask me to an architecture exhibition." Deal was quiet for a moment. "The architecture exhibition," he said carefully, in the tone of a man who understood exactly why that detail was significant and wasn't going to make her explain it. "He gave it up," she said. "University, the whole path. He mentioned it once at dinner, and then he moved on, and he hasn't brought it up again since. And he was going to take me anyway. Not to impress me, not to make a point about sacrifice." She stopped. "Because he thought I would find it interesting." A long pause on Dealey's end. "Zuri," he said gently, "what does your gut say? Not your history. Not the thing you learned to do after the last time something cost you. Your gut, right now, tonight, about this specific man." She picked up her wine, looked at it, set it back down. "That he's real," she said. "My gut has been saying it since the first lunch, and I have been finding very sophisticated reasons not to listen to it." "Then stop finding them," Deal said simply. She sat with that long after she hung up. The withdrawal letter sat closed on her laptop. She didn't open it again. She didn't delete it either. She left it exactly where it was and went to bed and lay in the dark and thought about a man who forgot to taste his food and rearranged rooms and showed up in 19 minutes and told the truth without asking for anything in return. She thought about Madame Hyjin's voice going quiet and real beneath the composure. "He has just been waiting for someone who would let him." She thought about her own voice answering, "I know." She fell asleep before she had finished deciding anything, which was perhaps the most honest answer she had given herself in years. The call came at 8:14 the following morning, not Shin Woo, his mother. Zuri answered it sitting on the edge of her bed, still inside yesterday's weight, not yet fully present in the new day. "I'm not calling to persuade you of anything," Madame Hyjin said without preamble. No warmth cushioning, no social architecture preceding it. Straight into it, which told Zuri immediately that the woman was operating from somewhere more urgent than strategy this morning. "I have no agenda in this call. I need you to understand that before I say what I'm about to say." Zuri was quiet, listening. "My son went to the board this morning," Madame Hyjin said. "Before 8 o'clock, he requested an emergency session and he received one because when Shinwoo requests something formally in that building, he gets it." A pause in which Zuri could hear the older woman choosing her next words with unusual care. "He stood in front of 12 board members and he did not protect the family name. He named the source of the leak by name. In a recorded session, with documentation he had clearly been preparing since yesterday afternoon. He then issued a public statement, under his own name, not the company's, not the family's, his alone, correcting the narrative around you, and making explicit that the damage to your professional reputation was a direct result of internal bad faith and had no factual basis." Zuri sat very still. "He took the full press exposure himself," Madame Hyjin continued. "By this afternoon, his name will be in every financial and industry publication attached to a board conflict. There will be questions about Bay Holdings' internal unity. Investors will call. It will be an uncomfortable number of weeks." Another pause, and this one was not entirely steady. "He knew every one of those consequences before he walked into that room this morning. I know because I was there. I watched him do it." The line held a silence between them. Hyjin sees Zuri started. "I'm not finished." The older woman's voice was still controlled, but beneath the control, something genuine was pressing through. Not performance, not orchestration, simply a mother telling the truth about her son, with the quiet force of someone who needed it to be received accurately. "He did not tell me he was going to do it. He did not consult me, or the legal team, or anyone. He decided alone last night, and he acted this morning. When I found him afterward and asked him why he had chosen to expose himself and the family to all of that for this, right now," he said. Madame Hyjin paused, and Zuri heard her take a breath that was not entirely composed. He said, "Because she spent 10 years building something in a city that wasn't born hers, and her name is the whole thing, and I am not going to let someone else's bad faith touch it." Zuri pressed her hand flat against her knee and kept it there. "That is who he is," Madame Hyjin said quietly. "That is who he has always been. I did not teach him that, he came with it. I have simply had the privilege of watching it." A final pause. "I told you once that I knew my son. I was not performing when I said it. I have never performed about him." The call ended. Zuri sat in the morning light of her bedroom for a long time without moving. She thought about 10 years in a city that hadn't been born hers. About a name she had built from nothing in a language she had taught herself, in an industry that had not been waiting for her, through years of work that had no guarantee attached to it. She thought about what it had cost her to build that name and what it would cost her to see it touched by something she hadn't chosen. And she thought about a man who had understood that, who had understood the specific, particular, non-abstract weight of that, and had walked into a room before 8 in the morning to make sure no one else's mess landed on it. He hadn't told her he was going to do it. He hadn't done it so she would know. Hadn't done it to be witnessed or credited or thanked. He had simply done it because it was the right thing, and she was worth it, and those two facts had been sufficient. She got up, went to the kitchen, opened her laptop. The withdrawal letter was still there, cursor blinking patiently in the subject line, waiting for her to finish what she'd started. She looked at it for a long moment, then she closed it. Not archived, not saved to drafts, just closed. The way you close a door on a room you've decided you don't need to go back into. She walked away from the counter, went to the window, stood in the morning light with Seoul beginning its day below her. Bright and forward-moving and entirely alive, she opened her messages, found his name, looked at the last thing he'd sent. I still think you'd find it interesting, and stayed with it. The smallness of it, the simplicity. A man who had spent the previous day doing something significant and costly on her behalf, and whose last message to her had been about an architecture exhibition, offered quietly with no strings attached to it. She typed, "What time is the exhibition?" Sent it before she could find a reason not to. His reply came in 3 minutes, Saturday. 2 o'clock, I'll pick you up. Then, after a brief pause, a second message arrived. Thank you. She put the phone down on the windowsill, looked out at Seoul, burning and bright in the morning. She felt something release in her chest, not dramatically, not all at once. Not in the way things released in stories, quietly, steadily. The way a breath goes out of you when you have been holding it for longer than you realized, and you finally, simply, stop. She called Deal. He answered on the first ring. I'm not sending the letter, she said. The sound he made was so purely, thoroughly relieved and so entirely undignified that she laughed, genuinely, from somewhere real, for the first time since Wednesday morning. Good, he said. Good. Zuri. Good. Don't make it a whole thing. I am making it a precisely sized thing. I am making it exactly as large as it deserves to be, which is considerably large. Deal. You are going to be so happy, he said, and his voice had gone warm and simple and completely sincere beneath all the noise. I just want you to know that. I have known you for 11 years and I am telling you. You are going to be so thoroughly, embarrassingly happy, and I am going to be delighted about it every single day. She looked out at Seoul, at the city that had claimed her and that she had claimed back, that had asked everything of her and given everything in return, that had led her into a lobby in Hanamdong on an ordinary Tuesday evening and placed an extraordinary woman with quiet heels and knowing eyes directly in her path. Don't tell anyone, she said. I have already told my mirror, my houseplants, and my building's elevator, Deal said. Everyone else will find out in their own time. She shook her head. She was still smiling when she hung up. Outside, Seoul glittered on, indifferent and magnificent, entirely unaware of what it had started. Please, if you have gotten this far, comment where you're watching this from and subscribe to support the channel. Saturday arrived the way good things sometimes did, quietly, without announcement, slipping into the morning before she had fully decided how she felt about it. Zuri was up before her alarm. She had been lying in the specific half-awake state that wasn't sleep and wasn't wakefulness but existed somewhere between the two, where the mind runs ahead of permission and thinks about things it hasn't been given clearance to think about yet. She had been thinking about an architecture exhibition, about a man who had given up the thing he loved most before she ever met him, who had never once asked her to feel sorry about it, and who had been going to take her to see it anyway because he thought she would find it interesting. She had been thinking about that word. Interesting. The simplicity of it. The confidence of someone who had paid enough attention to know what she would find interesting, and had offered it without making it a statement about himself. She got up, made coffee, stood at her window watching Seoul assemble itself into a Saturday morning, slower than weekdays, warmer, the city's perpetual forward motion easing fractionally into something that almost resembled rest. She thought about the withdrawal letter sitting closed on her laptop, unsent and undeleted. She had not opened it again. She had decided, somewhere between Madame Hyjin's call and the morning, that not opening it again was itself a kind of answer. Her phone was on the counter. She looked at it. Then she went to get dressed. He arrived at 2 o'clock exactly, She opened the door in a chocolate-brown fitted blazer dress, gold waist chain, her locks half up with gold pins, 2 gold hoop earrings catching the afternoon light. She had spent 40 minutes deciding and had arrived at something that looked like she had spent no time at all, which was the only outcome she considered acceptable. He looked at her the way he always looked at her. The whole thought, Dell had once said, and she understood now precisely what that meant, not scanning, not assessing, simply seeing her, fully, like she was the thing his attention had been moving toward all day without him having to steer it. "Hi," he said, just that. "Hi," she said back. They took the subway. This had been his suggestion, offered a little tentatively, as if he wasn't sure how she'd receive it. The gallery is easier by subway, if that's all right. And she had said yes immediately, because she liked the subway, because it was real, because a man with a driver and a dynasty who chose the subway on a Saturday afternoon was telling her something true about himself without meaning to. They stood in the car with the easy, comfortable proximity of people who have been pretending for some time that the space between them is professional, and have recently stopped pretending. Seoul moved past the windows in its underground dark. Neither of them spoke much. It wasn't the silence of people who had run out of things to say. It was the silence of people who had enough between them, now that silence was simply another form of it. At one point, the train curved, and she shifted slightly, and their shoulders pressed together, and neither of them moved apart. Neither of them mentioned it. The gallery was a converted building in a quiet Itaewon street. Not the Itaewon of crowds and noise, but the upper, residential edge of it, where the streets narrowed, and the buildings had history in their bones. The retrospective was spread across 3 floors. Architecture as philosophy, as memory, as resistance, buildings that had survived things, structures designed not just for function, but for the specific human need to feel held by space. Zuri walked through it slowly. She did not rush galleries. She never had. She moved through a space the way she worked, with full attention, staying with something until she had understood it, rather than moving on to appear productive. Shinwoo seemed to understand this immediately and matched his pace to hers without comment, which she noticed and filed. On the second floor there was a scale model of a building that had never been built. A community arts center designed in the early 2000s for a neighborhood in Seoul that had been raised for development before the ground could be broken. The model was beautiful, clean, human-scaled, full of the specific generosity of a building, designed by someone who believed the people who would use it deserved something excellent. Zuri stood in front of it for a long time. "This one," she said. "Yes," Shinwoo said. He was standing beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "This one is the one I came for." She looked at him. "Did you know about this building? Before today?" A brief pause. "I wrote my secondary thesis on it," he said, "at 18. Before I knew I wasn't going to study architecture." He looked at the model. "I thought if I could understand why a building that never existed still mattered, I'd understand something important about why things that don't get to happen still shape the people who imagined them." Zuri looked at the model, then back at him. "Did you?" she said. "Understand it?" He considered this with the genuine seriousness she had come to expect from him. "I think I'm still working it out," he said quietly. She looked at the model for another long moment. Then she reached over, without looking at him, and took his hand. It was the first time she had been the one to reach. He went very still for exactly 1 second. She felt it, the held breath of someone receiving something they had stopped expecting. Then his hand closed around hers, warm and certain, and they stood together in front of the building that had never been built, and said nothing at all, which was the only thing there was to say. They walked back through Itaewon afterward, through the narrower streets where the light came down between buildings in specific golden angles, and they talked, easily, fully, the way they had been talking for weeks now in the gathered moments between professional things. Except that today there was no professional framework around it, and neither of them needed one. He told her about the architecture thesis, about being 18 and completely certain he had found the thing, about the conversation with his father, quiet, definitive, not cruel, simply the weight of a dynasty pressing down on the path of a single person, and the particular loneliness of understanding, even as it happened, that the weight was not malicious and the loneliness was not the point. "Do you regret it?" she asked. He thought about it honestly. "Some days," he said, "less than I used to. The work I do now, some of it matters. The foundation especially." He paused. "Some of it is just weight management." She laughed at that. Genuinely, the real one. And he looked at her with an expression of pleased, quiet surprise, as if her laugh was something he was still getting used to having access to. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "I just like that sound." She looked away at the street. But she was smiling. He told her about the board session, simply, without making it into a story about himself. Just the facts of what had happened and why, and what it was likely to cost in the weeks ahead. He didn't ask for her reaction. He wasn't telling her to produce one. He was simply sharing the truth of his week the way people share things with someone who has earned the right to know. You didn't have to do it publicly, she said. You could have handled it quietly. Internal discipline, a retraction through the legal team. It wouldn't have made the news. No, he agreed, but it wouldn't have been enough. No, he said again. She looked at him. Why? He was quiet for a moment. They were on a narrow street now, old buildings on both sides, the city hushing slightly around them. Because quiet is how things like that survive, he said finally. Quiet is how they decide it was acceptable. And it wasn't acceptable. He looked at her directly. Your name is not a casualty of my family's internal politics. I needed that to be said where it could be heard. Zuri held that for a moment. The directness of it, the complete absence of performance in it. It's going to be a difficult few weeks, she said. Yes, for you, yes. You're very calm about it, he looked at her steadily. Because the thing I was most afraid of losing isn't something that happens in a board meeting, he said. Simple. True. Completely without strategy. Zuri looked at the street ahead of them. At Seoul going gold around them in the late afternoon, at the city she had chosen a decade ago, and remade herself inside of, at the life she had built in this place that had asked everything of her, and given everything back. She tightened her hand in his. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. 3 weeks later, the exhibition opened. Roots and resonance filled the Bay Legacy Foundation's gallery from floor to ceiling with something that everyone who attended would describe differently afterward. Moving, electric, like being recognized by something that didn't know you. But that they would all agree, without exception, was extraordinary. The live performance components were exactly what Zuri had envisioned in the brief she had spent 4 days on. In the presentation Shinwoo had listened to without waiting for his turn, in the late nights at the foundation table, with color swatches, and reference photographs, and handwritten notes, crowding the margins of everything. Faces that told stories. Makeup that moved between tradition and modernity the way the exhibition itself did. Not choosing between them, holding both. Visual cohesion that felt organic rather than engineered, the way the best work always felt. Like it had always been there. And you were simply the person who had helped it become visible. Her work was threaded through the whole exhibition like a signature. Present everywhere. Obvious nowhere. The highest possible result. She stood at the reception in a floor-length deep emerald silk gown, one shoulder, her locks fully down and adorned with small gold cuffs catching the gallery light. Dramatic gold jewelry at her throat and ears. She looked like something the exhibition had produced rather than someone who had produced the exhibition, which was exactly right. She watched people move through the space. She watched them stop in front of pieces and go quiet with the specific quality of quiet that meant something had reached them. She watched a woman put her hand over her mouth in front of one of the performance photographs. She watched a man stand in front of the textile installation for so long that the people around him began to orbit him like a planet. She watched 2 young women take each other's hands in front of the film component. 2 women who looked like they had walked a long way to find something that looked like them, and had found it here, in this room, because of work that she and a team of people had given everything to get right. She felt the particular satisfaction of work that had become exactly what it was supposed to be. She had felt it before, in campaign frames and campaign shoots, and the specific moment a face in her chair became the face the person had always been waiting to see in a mirror. But this was larger. This had more hands in it. This had more at stake. This had a man who had listened without waiting for his turn, who had asked the right question, who had rearranged a room because she was right and then gone back to work. She felt him beside her before she saw him. That was the thing she had noticed first. The way his presence registered before her eyes confirmed it. The warmth of him, the specific gravity of him beside her. The way her body had quietly and without her explicit permission begun to know when he was near. Shinwoo stood beside her in a black tuxedo, white shirt open at the collar, and looked out at the room. Their shoulders were touching. He had a glass in each hand and he offered one to her without looking. The way you offer something to a person who is simply part of your body's awareness, and she took it the same way. They stood like that for a moment, watching their work exist in the world, watching people receive it, the gallery humming around them with the warm particular energy of a thing that had been made with care, and was now doing what it was made to do. "It's good," he said quietly. "It's good," she agreed. He turned to look at her then. That look, the whole thought look, the one that had done something to her pulse since the first lunch, and that she had long since stopped pretending it didn't. 3 months in, all the weeks of careful professional proximity and late nights, and rearranged rooms, and a hand taken quietly on a Mapo street and a building that never got built. That look landed on her face with the full weight of everything it had always carried. "Thank you," he said. She turned to look at him. For what? For letting it be real. He said simply, the way he said everything true, all of it. He wasn't only talking about the exhibition. He was talking about the exhibition, and he was talking about everything else, and she understood both things simultaneously and completely. She looked at him for a long moment. This careful, quiet, unfairly present man who had texted her at 9:17 at night about a reference document as a reason to be in contact, who had rearranged a room because she had been right and said nothing further about it, who had forgotten to taste his food at the first lunch because he was too busy listening, who had walked into a boardroom before 8 in the morning and said her name out loud where it could be heard and protected, and let the cost of that fall entirely on himself, who had taken her to see a building that had never been built and stood beside her in front of it and said, "I think I'm still working it out," with the honesty of a person who had decided, somewhere along the way, that she was worth being honest with. She leaned up slowly and pressed her lips to his cheek, warm, deliberate, her mouth close to his ear. "Thank you," she said softly against his skin, "for being worth letting it be." He turned his head just slightly, just enough, and caught her mouth with his. The kiss was brief and warm and certain, the kind that isn't trying to say anything, because everything has been said, and this is simply the confirmation of it, not a beginning, an arrival. Somewhere across the gallery, Madame Haijin, who had been watching from a discreet position near the sculpture installation with a flute of champagne and the deep, private contentment of a woman whose plan had concluded precisely as she had always known it would, made a sound. It was a small sound, dignified, entirely controlled. The most refined version of joy that money and elegance and 35 years of loving a complicated, beautiful, worthy son could produce. She raised her champagne flute, to nobody in particular, to the room, to Seoul outside the gallery windows, glittering and indifferent and magnificent, doing what it always did. She had known from a lobby in Hanamdong on an ordinary Tuesday evening, from the moment she saw a woman walk across a marble floor like she had always belonged there, like the city had made itself around her rather than the other way around. She had known. It was, she thought, one of the very finest things about being the kind of woman who paid close attention. You got to watch things become inevitable slightly before anyone else realized they were. She sipped her champagne, watched her son's shoulders settle into something she had not seen in a very long time, the posture of a person who has set down a weight they had been carrying so long they had forgotten it wasn't part of them. She watched Zuri Ibarra, with her locks and her gold and her deep luminous skin and her full berry lips and the specific, irreducible quality of a woman who had built everything she had from nothing in a city that hadn't been born hers. She watched this woman turn back, toward the room with her shoulder pressed against Shin Woo's, and her chin up, and her eyes moving through the space with the calm satisfaction of someone who knew exactly what she had made and knew exactly what it was worth. Daughter-in-law, Madame Haijin thought, with the simple certainty of someone who had already decided, and was simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up. She raised her glass once more. Outside, Seoul glittered on. And here's what the story teaches us, if we are paying attention. The right love does not arrive with fanfare. It does not announce itself in grand gestures or perfect timing or the absence of cost. It arrives in lobbies and late nights and rearranged rooms. It arrives in the second look, the one that requires you to actually pay attention, the one that rewards you for staying past the obvious thing. It arrives in a man who forgets to taste his food because he is too busy listening, in a woman who keeps a card in her interior pocket and moves it, without examining why, from one bag to the next. Zuri Ibarra had spent 10 years building something extraordinary in a city that had asked everything of her. She had learned along the way to protect what she built with both hands, to wait for certainty before she let herself believe, to know her own worth so precisely that she could feel immediately, clearly, when something or someone fell short of it. She had been right to learn all of those things, and she had been right, finally, to let them rest, because the right love does not ask you to stop protecting yourself. It simply becomes the thing you no longer need protection from. Being accomplished and self-sufficient and certain of your own worth does not mean closing the door on love. It means knowing exactly what you deserve and being able to recognize it, clearly and without apology, when it walks through a restaurant door in a dark charcoal suit and stops. And sometimes the universe, in its particular wisdom, sends the mother first. Thank you so much for watching. If this story reached something in you, please like, share, and subscribe. There are more stories coming that were made for you specifically in this exact way. Leave a comment below. Tell us which moment stayed with you. We read every single one. Afro-Korean Multiverse, where every love story is cinematic, every woman is the main character, and the slow burn always pays off.